workers we need. Value add, now this is, value add is basically the amount of wages paid to the construction workers and the amount of profits made by construction companies. Value add has also declined. In the residential sector, the trend is not very clear, but in the non-residential sector, value add has declined, and in services, value add has also declined. So basically, these are my findings from input-output tables. Multiplier has not changed very much since 2001, 2002, but imports have increased. Imports is now nearly 25% of total intermediate inputs. So for example, if you look at all the construction materials that are used in the construction industry, nearly 25% of those products are today imported. Our workers are all domestic workers. Therefore, the decline in the number of workers per $1 million can be directly attributed to loss of production due to imports. There's an overall decline in incomes, and there's an overall decline in value add. We now try to examine, using another database again, what exactly are we losing overseas? So this is not looking at construction, but looking more at manufacturing imports. Now, if you look at manufacturing sectors, timber, wood manufacture, ceramics, which are your tiles, glass, stone, aluminum, electrical cable, electrical lighting equipment, HVAC, construction machinery, wooden furniture. So these are all the subsectors of the manufacturing sector that supply materials to the construction industry. We find that 6 sectors now have very high imports, which means it's greater than 50%. So these manufacturing sectors now import more than 50% of their products. There are 5 sectors with medium imports, that means from 25% to 50%. And there are 10 sectors where the increase is greater than 10%. So what that basically shows is that if you look at this figure here, about half of the manufacturing sectors that supply to construction are buying more and more products from overseas. And that does not bode well for the Australian construction sector, does not bode well for the Australian manufacturing sector. I do not have time to go through every one of these sectors, but I will just give you 2 examples. First example is glass. Australian labor costs, Australian production costs is so high that we have lost almost all glass production in Australia. We now have only one local manufacturer of glass, that is Viridian Glass. It's a very high-end product, and we can't compete. We can only get the method here today is for the construction industry to use low-cost imports from Asia. So the reason is because our manufacturing cost is very high, our labor cost is high, therefore we can only manufacture high technology products, and any product that is generic, common, run-of-the-mill will generally come from Asia. Second example is cement production. Many of us are civil engineers, and you will realize that cement production produces a lot of greenhouse gases, uses a lot of energy, and produces lots and lots of greenhouse gases. In Australia, back in 2012, the Labor government proposed a carbon tax, and that was mainly to encourage a reduction in the use of technologies that were dirty, and therefore if you then impose a carbon tax, industries like cement manufacturing would not survive in Australia, right? So in Australia, we have very stringent emissions and sustainability regulations. Now, because of that, many Australian cement manufacturers scaled back clinker production and moved the production of clinker overseas. Now, if you look at this figure here, the gray bit is clinker imports. Now, if you look at the graph, you can notice that there is an increase in Australian demand for clinker and for cement. but Australian clinker production has actually come down. The red bit is Australian production that has come down over time. The jump is especially obvious after 2012. So once they proposed the carbon tax, the manufacturers started moving the cement plant overseas. Now, the funny thing was this: the carbon tax, even though it was proposed in 2012, was never implemented. But once the manufacturers started moving cement plant overseas, they will not return to Australia, right? If you can move your production to a lower labor cost country, it makes sense for those manufacturers to remain where they are and they do not return to Australia. So that's why you see that this is approximately about 40% of clinker production is now in Asia. So we've lost many of the manufacturing capacity here. So let me just summarize why Australia is outsourcing a lot of all these to Asia. Number one, production costs. We have very high labor costs in Australia. There's lower labor costs in Asia. Therefore, production costs is much, much cheaper in Asia. And that is the number one reason for manufacturers to move their production overseas. Increased competition in construction. Our builders operate in a very, very competitive environment. Clients are very price sensitive, so they will be pushing their builders to give them lowest cost. Servitization is where Australian manufacturers move the manufacturing capacity overseas while keeping more higher value added tasks like research and development, design and marketing in Australia. We've spoken about the carbon tax. There's also excess production capacity in Asia. For example, China has large capacities in steel manufacturing and strategic relocation by multinational firms. Many of these multinational firms compare production costs in Australia versus Thailand versus India versus Vietnam, and they are the ones who are very mercantilist in terms of where to locate their production facilities, and when they realize that it's cheaper in Vietnam, they will just shift production to Vietnam. So in summary, yes, we have increased our reliance on a global supply chain. Our direct imports into construction has remained stable, but our indirect imports from the manufacturing sectors have gone up. So my question to the Australian sector is this: what does the future hold for the Australian construction industry? Do we continue to be integrated in the global supply chain? The COVID-19 pandemic has taught us a lesson, right? That if one country has to shut down manufacturing capacity, then we suffer. The materials no longer come from China. What should we do? Should we rely more, or should we continue to rely on Australian manufacturing, or do we rely more on low-cost producers in Asia? I do not have a firm conclusion about this. I will leave it up to my other two researchers to continue this discussion, and I think this is a good place to end. Thank you very much. I've given you a sort of a brief overview of what we do and why we do this type of research. So questions, if you have any.
Yes.
Sir,
that was a nice presentation. Yeah. So, sir, shall we disable the chat for a few minutes? Sendil sir, enable the chat, please.
1 second.
We'll take a couple of questions, and then we will have another session at the end of all the presentations. For now, we can take some 2 or 3 questions. Thank you, Tiki. It was a nice presentation. It was very nicely crisp and clear. And really, there is a need for working on all these cost aspects. As you say, the labor productivity and how do we go? Now, what do you see the impact of this COVID on our construction industry? How do you think we are going to recover And how would be its effect on the cost price?
Okay, in Australia, the industry has just gone into a partial shutdown, and only 25% of the construction workers can now work on a construction site. That basically slows down construction activities tremendously. That is what's happening on site. Now, in terms of materials, many of the materials that we use come from overseas. Obviously, concrete is locally produced. Steel can be imported or locally produced. But with the supply chain delays, so shipping has been severely affected. Shipping costs have gone up. So some of my former students who are now working in industry tell me that shipping costs for certain products have gone up by 50%. So these are some of the issues that are that are these are some of the challenges that the industry is facing today, and we don't really have a good handle about where or how these issues will be resolved, because we do not know exactly when the COVID-19 vaccine is coming out. We do not know how long these restrictions will last, but I'm sure the impact will be felt for at least another 3 to 6 months.
Yes. Yeah. And I hope I'm audible. And in India, I'm not very sure how it is there in Australia, but in India, the GDP of contribution of the construction industry is second in line next to the agriculture industry.
Yes,
So
I believe that
I'm
is
sure
very
that
true.
with the impact of this COVID crippling the construction industry, particularly the labor force have been terribly affected. So that is going to have indirectly an impact on the national economy also. The government is taking a lot of measures and a lot of efforts to see that we are limping back to normalcy. But then again and again, the bout which it has given to us is very difficult for us to recover. So how do you foresee the future, in terms of the construction labor and other people who are dependent on this construction industry? And do you think we can really bring down the cost of construction in the next few years? Would it be possible to bring in a low cost construction, which is the need for the day, than what it is now?
Uh, you've actually asked a very, very good question. My view of construction costs is that construction costs in many countries are not high. Construction costs in developing countries tend to be very, very low. It is primarily because that your labor cost is low, your materials are almost free, because most countries use brick, you use materials that you have in abundance, you use labor that is freely available. So I will argue that most countries are already building at a very, very cheap rate. Uh, so I was in another discussion with academics and industry practitioners from Malaysia, and one very interesting point they made is that perhaps you have to increase wages to make people more wealthy than try to look for cheap ways to build. It is already very cheap, and trying to look for cheaper ways to build will reduce your construction quality. Okay, so I'm not an advocate for looking for cheaper construction. I think the way to go is look for more productive construction. You can try to look to build more effectively, you can build more productively, you can improve quality, but you cannot make it cheaper. By making it cheaper, you are indirectly cutting down on wages, and wages is what keeps the construction workers alive. So coming out of this COVID-19 pandemic, I believe many governments will be trying to stimulate their economies by spending more on construction. As you have correctly mentioned, construction is a large contributor to GDP. So if you spend more on construction, you are indirectly stimulating your economy. I hope that that may not fully answer your question, but it gives you an idea of where to go. Hello? George, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, but the Indians have sort of...
They're all muted.
Yeah, but there is no activity.
No movement from them.
No movement from them. So it's quite strange. Is there an Australia-India connection
Sir,
that's not...
sir, I hear you, sir. I hear you, sir.
Okay, very good. Prof. Madhavi has gone silent.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I thought I am online. I was reading the question for you. Yeah, fine. I think I lost the chat. I'll just read out the question for you. Mr. Shivaraman was asking, what are the measures taken in mitigation measures taken in Australia to overcome this COVID-related issues, disruptions? Measures taken in Australia.
Do you mean for the construction industry?
Yeah, mitigation measures. Yes. With respect to construction industries, what are the mitigation measures planned in Australia?
Okay, let me just explain what has happened. Now, when the COVID-19 impacted Australia in March this year, the government did not shut down the industry. Construction industry was deemed to be an essential part of the economy, and it was not shut down. So there was very minimal impact in terms of jobs. The only impact was just a delay in the supply of materials, especially when these materials came from overseas. What has happened so the entire Australia, there was no shutdown for the construction sector. Only in Melbourne over the last week did they reduce the number of construction workers working on a construction site to 25%. So the impact has been very, very minimal in terms of work that is currently going on. The short-term impact is that demand for construction services have dropped off. Many of the developers have postponed the call for jobs, calling for tenders for residential apartments, and we expect 2021 to be a particularly slow year for building construction. We expect the government of Australia to start to think about stimulus packages to get the economy running again. And that will be probably something like $100 billion in stimulus packages to the construction sector.
Yeah. So one other question for you. Ritik Sharma is asking this. You're hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah. So why not Australia concentrate on lowering the labor cost by using your own labor and producing within your country?
Our labor cost is very, very high. So if we were to manufacture here, it would be 3 times more expensive than manufacturing it in Asia.
Yeah. So I think we'll close this session with this question and answers. Maybe we'll continue after all the 4 speakers have done. So now I would request Sendil Velan to introduce the next speaker for the day.
Yes, ma'am. Now I am happy to introduce the second speaker, Mr. Victor Sir. He is a second year PhD candidate at the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne, Australia. He is researching on industry assistance to the local construction supply chain aimed increasing globalization and offshoring. He finished his first degree in project management at Federal University of Technology in 2012. After his graduation, he worked for Onge Construction Limited, a building contractor, before he enrolled for the mandatory one-year National Youth Service. During his national service, he was posted to a major construction company, Sterico Company Limited, as an assistant project manager. He also worked for a financial consultancy firm. He won a foreign postgraduate scholarship for his second degree sponsored by NDDC. He entered a master degree in construction project and cost management at Convenity University, UK. He started his PhD in April 2019. His research interest management. Now, I request you to continue, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So, can everyone see my screen? So, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak in this seminar. I want to appreciate the organizers, my supervisor TK and Professor Madhavi from India for this opportunity. So the topic of my research is the impact of economic globalization on the construction supply chain, the response of the Victorian state government. So the challenge in Australia is a bit tricky because the federal government is more like a free trade party, while the state government is not favorably disposed to 100% free trade. So the state government is trying to kind of mitigate some of the impacts of free trade on the construction supply chain by offering some local industrial assistance to the manufacturers and suppliers and other participants in the supply chain. My presentation will be divided into three: the perspectives of economic globalization, the impacts of economic globalization on the construction supply chain, and my proposed research. So so economic globalization is seen as the integration of markets. So when we mean integration of markets, we mean a free market where someone can be in Australia and buy goods from China or buy goods from India without any barrier. So globalization can be in the form of international trade. It can be in the form of foreign direct investment, and it can be in the form of global financial flows. So my research is focusing more on international trade. And theoretically, there's a perspective to economic globalization, which is called neoliberalism. So neoliberalism is an ideology that is built on the Heckschaolin theory, which says that nations benefit more when they trade, so that the gain from trade is better for nations than protectionism. So and this ideology was cemented with the 1989 Washington Consensus, and global institutions like World Trade Organizations and World Bank and IMF, they run on these ideologies. And so after neoliberalism, the next one is rejectionism. So rejectionism is the idea that says that globalization is unsafe, is unjust, is undemocratic, and is unsustainable. And this ideology says that we should replace imports with local products. Looking at some of the trade data that DK has presented, which talks of loss of jobs, loss of income in the local manufacturing sector. So because of those impacts, this perspective is saying that globalization should be rejected. And then the last one is reformism. Reformism is the idea that globalization can be salvaged, that it can be used in a profitable way, that globalization is good if there is income redistribution. And that is what the Victorian state government is trying to do. Because they can't actually reject globalization outrightly. They don't have the power to kind of cancel the free trade agreement of the federal government. They are trying to see how they can remedy the effects of free trade on their local industry. Then the next part, we start by showing the participants in the construction supply chain. So we have the main contractor, the subcontractors, the manufacturers, and the input suppliers. So my research is primarily focused on the manufacturers and the subcontractors who are mostly in Australia and who are the ones that feel the impact of this import competition that is mostly coming from China. And if you look at some data, there has been an increase in the ratio of imports from 35% to 57% from 2010 to 2019. So there has been increased penetration of imports, and this has led to decline in the manufacturing in Australia. There has been some manufacturing companies closing. There have been some loss of jobs, and the impact has been very, very severe in the local industry. And if you look closely, you can see some of the manufacturing sectors that have felt this import intrusion more, like electric cable and wire, electric lighting equipment, fabricated goods manufacturing, and even fabricated metal steel. So these are the major manufacturing sectors that support construction. They have faced increasing import competition, and this data tries to show the loss of jobs. There have been loss of 165,000 jobs in manufacturing in Australia in the last 10 years, and there has also been a decline in the share of manufacturing value added from around 14% in 1980 to close to 6% in 2018. Then let's look at the response of the Victorian state government. So the Victorian government came up with a local content policy known as the Local Jobs First Act 2003. It was amended in 2018. And the highlight of the policy is that for any project that is more than 15 million, the impact, the materials from that project, 90% of it must be local. It must be bought from either Victoria, Australia, or New Zealand. So that is the highlight of the project. So the local content policy is trying to provide them revenue for the local manufacturers. And there's also the labor aspect of it, which says that for any project that is worth $20 million or above, that at least 10% of the employee hours in that project must be allocated to Victorian apprentices, their trainees, and their cadets. So the policy is more like trying to support the local industry. And the policy also gives a lot of power to the Minister of Industry to make some specific recommendation on the usage of steel, because steel is a very important component in the battle for local content. Then looking at it from the theoretical aspect, there are some benefits and criticisms of local industry assistance. The benefits of local industry assistance is that it supports the local industry, it increases local jobs, it has an economic multiplier effect, and it can attract foreign investors if they are promised things like tax reliefs or economic free zones or whatever. They can come to invest. And it also has some criticisms in theory. The major criticism is that it promotes inefficiency, that money is taken from consumers and given to industry, and it does not allow for competition, and also that it can lead to rent seeking and corruption, where industry begins to bribe or lobby the government, say lobby the government rather for assistance. So my proposed research is trying to look at the Victorian state government, because I remember that in November last year, India refused to sign the regional trade agreement with Australia, China, and the Association of Southeast Nations. They had some reservations with imports flooding their local market. So for the Victorian state government, is a bit challenging because the federal government does not have that kind of reservations for Australia. So they just try to do what they can do within their powers. So my first research question is, why should the government provide industrial assistance? So there are some arguments in theory that when there is market failure, when there is economies of scale, when there are some unfavorable practices from your competitor, you can provide industrial assistance. And then the next question is, what should be the main objective of industrial assistance? Should it be just to provide revenue, or should it be to improve the competitiveness of the local industry so that they can participate and compete globally? And also to look at the local jobs first policy, the existing policy of the state government, to know if that policy is actually fulfilling the objective of industrial assistance. Then I'm also looking at theoretically, I'm looking at the theories of international trade, because the major theory that has influenced international trade over the past 50 years is we call them the neoliberal theories, like comparative advantage and Hexaolin theory that talks about free trade. But the challenges of the theory is that the assumptions are difficult to prove. So the assumptions don't look realistic, like things like that a country produces only two goods, that countries have the same technology, which is not true, and things like that consumers have the same taste in both countries. So some of these assumptions have been very, very difficult for economists to prove, and it has made the theory to encounter a lot of difficulties when it is tried empirically. Then alternative to that is mercantilism. Mercantilism is a theory that says that 100% free trade is not going to be good for everyone. That government should intervene in trade. Government should not just watch trade. That government should take an active participation in trade to protect the welfare of its citizens. And then the increasing returns theory and strategic policy is an offshoot of Hexaolin. They are trying to say that Hexaolin theory is good. However, if there is increasing returns to scale, the government, because Hexaolin assumes that there is constant return to scale. But if there is increasing returns to scale, government should intervene. And if there is oligopoly, where two giant companies are competing for market share, a good example is Boeing and Airbus, that the government should also intervene to help the local industry. Then the theory of non-economic objectives is trying to justify the reason why government should intervene in the industry. When the government wants to, it says that if government wants to maintain local employment, that government should intervene. If government wants to maintain self-sufficiency, just like you have seen some difficulties with globalization, with this pandemic, with delays in supplies and all those things because of lack of self-sufficiency. So this theory is saying that if government wants to avert some of these challenges, that government should intervene in the industry. Government should not allow manufacturing just go like that, because Australian manufacturing is actually facing difficult challenges currently. So my research methodology is a mixed method, quantitative data analysis of some industry data, like inflow of imports, loss of jobs, loss of income, and then interview of experts to kind of develop a theory for industry assistance and to evaluate the local jobs first policy, and also to provide a fresh perspective to studying industry assistance. So that is what I intend to do, because it looks looking at the hexagonal theory, going back to that, like it looks very okay. It is an intelligent theory. If you do it, you can model it. You can economists say that it's the best thing that has happened to international trade in the past 50 to 70 years. However, there are lots of challenges with it, and some of its assumptions are not are difficult to prove. Like they look very, very unrealistic. So what my study is trying to do, in summary, is to say that, okay, free trade is good. We can't run away from free trade. We can't go back to the time of tariffs and trade barriers. However, there must be some way that government can support the local industry, because even under free trade agreements, there are exemptions for small and medium scale enterprises for government to assist them, because these small businesses are mostly found in local and regional areas, and they may not have the strength to compete with the global or the big businesses. So that is what my study is trying to do in summary. Thank you, and if you have any questions, you can ask me.
Sir, Sendil sir, please enable the chat.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
We'll take a few questions. There's one question here from Raza Ayub. Do you use machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence, in your construction projects? And if yes, how do you implement it? Hello,
Okay,
am I audible?
yeah.
The question
CK,
is,
can you answer that?
Okay, I'll take that question. Victor, maybe you can stop sharing your screen.
Okay, sure.
Okay, AI and all that. Yes, I think in Australia, many of the AI applications, the blockchain applications and all that are still very much at the research phase. We are looking at that at the universities, but we do not see massive implementations of this in the industry. So my personal feeling is that it is still in its infancy here. So there are some research projects. I have colleagues who are looking at using some form of AI in terms of project management software, applications in lean management, in BIM, but no major applications or real life industry applications yet.
So one, Ms. Vilasini is asking,
Yes.
Good morning, this is for you, Professor Chan. It is good morning, sir. Thank you very much. Should we think of the environmental benefits, such as by moving out of manufacturing unit, the pollution and other worries are now with the country, which allowed the unit than the end user? Or you should start worrying about the loss of labor?
Okay, let's go back to the example of the cement manufacturing. Now, if they manufacture cement in Australia, the carbon emissions will be in Australia. Because Australia proposed to put on a carbon tax, the manufacturer moved the cement production overseas. It will still be just as polluting overseas. And if you understand pollution and greenhouse gas emission, doesn't matter if the pollution occurs in Australia or if it occurs in Vietnam, we are still sharing this one world. So it is equally bad. It's just that manufacturers take advantage of a less stringent requirement in Asia compared to Australia or to other advanced economies. I don't think this is fair. I don't have a solution for this because many of the manufacturers are out there to make money. Can we reduce carbon emissions? Yes, we can. But as long as there are developing countries that need investments into manufacturing sectors, they will still continue to produce greenhouse gases. I do not have a solution.
Yes, true, that's right. Yeah. So I think we would close this session with this, and then we'll resume to the next speaker, and we'll come back to this again here in at the end of the speaker 4 sessions. We'll have one more discussion. So now I would request Sindhil Velan to introduce the next speaker.
Yes, ma'am. I'm happy to introduce the third speaker, Mr. Gopinath sir. He is graduated UG in Civil Engineering and PG in Construction Engineering Management at Anna University, Chennai, and pursuing PhD in SRM IST, Chennai. He published more than 20 papers in national and international conferences. He got university rank holder in post-graduation. Now I request you to continue with your presentation, sir.
And to mention Professor Chan, yeah, just to mention to Professor Chan, Mr. Gopinath is doing research under me. He is working on optimization techniques. So your suggestions are welcome. Gopinath, please go ahead. Gopi?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I will share the screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
My screen is visible?
Yeah, visible, yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction, sir. And thank you, ma'am, for the opportunity to be discuss the topic here. I welcome you all the participants and the resource persons for this workshop being organized by SRM Institute of Science and Technology in Ramapuram campus in association with the University of Melbourne. And proceeding with the title, I'm sharing some information, some methodologies that we have adopted regarding solving resource leveling problem in construction projects based on optimization. Right. So we will take a couple of seconds of time in viewing about this particular picture. This is very important. Please spend some time and observe what things that you can notify on it. Just a couple of seconds. All right, so it's a kind of construction project site. We have project managers there viewing how the works are going. We have the resource persons there to execute their works. We have scaffoldings being generated there. You can see lots of materials are being spreaded out there. And the management of all these resources are highly essential for the successful completion of the project. So the resource management is very important for any kind of project in any part of the world to remain competitive in the construction industry domain at any point of time. So one among the resource management technique is resource leveling. So moving to the next problem statement. Now this picture defines the problem. Again, I want to put some time here. Let's spend some seconds of time. What does this indicate? What problem we can able to observe? The plot shows the resource requirement, the graph between resource requirement and the days, the project duration in x-axis and resource requirement in y-axis. And we have different requirements on different days. So this is how our resource usage profile in most of the construction projects look like. and resource leveling are essential. Now, what is this resource leveling is how we can able to reduce these variations to a possible minimum extent so that we can execute the project with uniform utilization of resources, because there are three major problems and the constraint resource leveling problem has. The first factor is frequent hiring and firing of manpower is very difficult, because when we recruit more people, when we require more resources, and when we immediately fire them when they are not required in our project, and when we recruit them back, they may not come to our project, and the indirect cost that we spend is costly, because we need to spend more money in their training period. We need to make all the professions ready. Their potential will reduce, which will affect the completion of the project, will lead to extension in time, and that hiring and firing process of in frequent manner is very costly to make. And this is an important constraint. Resource leveling problem is constrained with the time. That means we can able to shift the activities with its only available flow days without exceeding the overall project duration. So it's a very important constraint which makes the problem further challenging in deciding which activities are possible to be shifted for how many number of days so that the resource variations are being brought down. So the major problem is when we have multiple number of non-critical activities with more number of flow days, the combinations are high in number. We can shift, for example, this picture shows a schedule here and then the same profile that we have seen earlier. We have list of activities, construction pouring activity, concrete pouring activity, and all the activities require some sort of resources. So when we shift one particular activity to a place, and that will have its impact on the profile of the histogram of resource usage. So the resource leveling problem mainly concentrate on finding out which activities are to be shifted for how many number of days so that we can have minimum variations in our resource requirement in the project. Right. On the literature note, the same problem, the resource leveling problem, is being contributed by lots of researchers across the globe from the year 1962 to even till in 2020. Almost 74 to 76 numbers of standard literature articles are there from higher end peer reviewed journals. So the reason are, as we've seen earlier, it's frequent hiring and firing is very difficult to do, it's costlier, and it's constrained by time. So since it is very important for any construction project to handle the resources in it, the researchers contributed in different aspects of providing a particular way for solving this resource leveling problem. And one among the common thing is the approaches. The evolution of problem solving approaches had a pattern. For example, initially, before going to that, the reason why the pattern existed was the resource leveling problem is related with non-polynomial combinatorial nature problem. It is because when you have more probabilities of shifting more number of non-critical activity, the available choices are in exponential number. So we cannot try all the possibilities one by one on iterative basis and then decide which is the possible best way to shift the activity. So far, they have few approaches. One of the approaches, the mathematical approach. So a step-by-step enumeration process in which you have definite variables in it, activity, flow time, and activity duration, the resource requirement on it, and they try to shift the activity so that the deviation between the resource requirement have been reduced. And these mathematical approaches was successful for a small scale project. However, when the problem size increases, for example, like a real-time construction project, when the magnitude of days are more and the resource requirements are very high, the mathematical approaches are very difficult to implement, and it takes too much computational time and effort to determine the optimal solution. Then the shift was slightly towards a random approach, in which people started to look for a solution in a random way, not in a predefined way like in the mathematical approach, and then they could arrive at a solution. Again, similar to the mathematical approach, even when the problem size is more, there was a problem for the heuristic approaches also to find the optimal solution. The advantage, one advantage in heuristic approaches, it suits medium-sized problems in defining the local solution, but the identification of global solution was still a challenging one with the heuristic approaches, and that lead to the concept of using evolutionary algorithms based on the evolution of natural species, like based on the Darwin's theory, like genetic algorithm or artificial neural networks, and colony optimization, and so on. So all these problems are non-mathematical, and it's all being also classified under the heading of meta-heuristic approaches, in which the nature of the problem, for example, in this case, resource leveling problem, are related with the evolutionary approaches, how the species got evolved over the time, and the fittest species survived. The fittest species will be the fittest activity in resource leveling problem that can be shifted so that the variations are being reduced drastically. So in that way, these evolutionary algorithms are being implemented. And from the literatures, it is very evident these evolutionary algorithms are being incorporated with commercial project management softwares to create add-in plugins to produce the optimal results for resource leveling problem. Because even though we have Primavera project management or Microsoft project management, the resource leveling option that is available in it works based on the heuristic approach, not based on this meta-heuristic approach. Hence, but still, these evolutionary algorithms identifies the local solution alone, but sometimes it gives the optimal solution for a larger problem size, but with a lesser computational time. That is one of the advantage between the heuristic and the meta-heuristic approach. And still, the further research and the most recent research works are trying a hybrid methodology, like combining two types of evolutionary algorithms to provide another algorithm that can identify the optimal solution in a better way, like relating simulating annealing approach with ant colony approach or particle swarm optimization to figure out the optimal solution. And people are even still trying hyper-heuristic based approaches. Like with neural networks and simulated annealing, they create layers of heuristics which take care of a particular procedure in one region and identifies the solution. So in the proposed work, we have considered a genetic algorithm based evolutionary algorithm, and we have considered a real-time construction project details for the activities, and we made a schedule with critical path method of schedule. And one another common thing among the literatures are most of the projects that they have considered for solving resource leveling problem are based on critical path method of schedule, as it is the mostly used scheduling method. But when we use non-finish to start precedent relationships in critical path method of scheduling, the identification of float days are complicated thing, little bit complicated thing, because it's not like simple finish to start relationship. The heuristic that is being followed in the forward and backward path assumes the late finish of the last activity as late finish of all the activities if we have start to start or finish to finish with certain lag days. So for that, to overcome that particular problem, we provide a modification to the scheduling method with the non-finish to start precedence relationship. And we also devise our own genetic algorithm code codes to run the problem and to provide the optimal solution. And we compare the results between the resource histogram of its previous actual network data and after leveling. So the genetic algorithm has some operators and a fitness function. So we will see one by one. It randomly generates a population, first of all, from the set of population. It randomly picks up, and for all the random population, a fitness function is being considered, and the fitness value is calculated. And based on the fittest values, the selection process is being implemented. For one among the popularly used selection are roulette wheel selection method, which selects which orders the sample solutions in ascending order in which it can be highly selected, and the selected toughest parents from the selection process are being muted and crossover. Like some parts in the parent 1 and some parts in the parent 2 are being crossed over, a simple phenomena that occurs in the reproduction, which leads to the formulation of a toughest candidate solution. And once this toughest candidate solution is developed, it goes back into the population again, and the cycle continues till we mention a definite number of generations and the operator variants for identifying the optimal solution. So the activity details are this. We considered a concrete pour activity of 6 instances with the durations, and the precedences are start to start with the lag days. And this table represents the resources that are all required that was used in the site, the number of resources with the 4 categories. So it's a multiple resources leveling problem. We have helper, mason, carpenter, and fitter in varying requirement for all the activities. So as this picture shows, in the critical path method of schedule, when we schedule the same activity on Microsoft Project Management, all the activities are deposited in critical form. So the one modifications that we made is we have divided the activities based on its lag days. For example, if the activity had start-to-start relationship with this previous activity of 1 day, we divided its previous activity with 1 day of lag, for 1 day of duration for the first part, and the remaining part of activity has 6 days. So I go back to the previous instance. In the CP1 we have 7 days, and in CP2 we have 9 days, and it is connected with the first activity with 1 day of lag. So in our approach, we divide the CP into 2. We fragment CP1 into 2 segments of this 1 day of lag duration as the first part, and the remaining of that as second part, 1 and 6 days, and we formulate a schedule. And we take the days and the cumulative resource quantity data into the genetic algorithm, and we specified the number of generation as 500 in number, and the optimal solutions are obtained. And when we decode it, it gave a result to shift the concrete pour activity by the float of 1 day, and the concrete pour activity 4 by 1 day, and concrete pour 5 activity by 2 days. And when we shifted those activities, the histogram which you can see in the figure 5a is the actual resource histogram of the initial schedule, and with the genetic algorithm results, we can see the peak resource requirement is brought down, and some of the variation that existed in the previous resource profile is being smoothened in this after leveling profile. So we can implement genetic algorithm based optimization techniques to solve the resource leveling problem, and the computational speed, like we got these results within 12 seconds of time with a normal computer that we use for operational purpose. And the problem can be further extended with activity splitting and more constraints on the resource leveling side, and different types of objective fitness functions that can also be tried. So this is one among the topic in which the research is being the research is being done for a long time, and it has the potential for the upcoming years as well. So I'm very thankful for this opportunity being provided, and I'm opening the session for any queries to be discussed regarding this topic. Thank you all.
Yes, Gopi.
Thank you.
That was a interesting work you have done. So I leave the forum open for questions now. So please leave the chat enabled. Allow the participants to raise the questions.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Rob, may I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Gopi, for your presentation. I think it's a very interesting topic that you've picked on. Resource leveling is an interesting, it's a very interesting problem to try to solve. My question to you is, you've chosen to use genetic algorithm versus the normal mathematical approach. do you have evidence that your genetic algorithm works better than the common mathematical approach? Do you adopt a performance indicator or a particular measure to prove that it is more efficient than commonly used mathematical approaches?
Yes, sir. In the literatures that came up in the decades of 1990 to 2000, the time in which this genetic algorithm based optimization are being started to use for industrial applications. There are comparisons between standard data sets, between the mathematical heuristic and the genetic algorithm approach, and the results are the findouts provided, like the genetic algorithm approach in determining the optimal solution or near optimal solution in a lesser computational time for a larger project is far better from the mathematical and the heuristic approaches. The performance indicators are also measured.
I agree with you that in general you will find that that is the finding. But what about your results? I'm more interested in what you have found. So you've done concrete 4.
Yeah.
So I think you've shown us about 8 concrete processes. How did your genetic algorithm perform relative to the mathematical approach?
Yeah, it gave the same result for the magnitude of the problem size that we have considered for the explanation purposes. As it is small, we can compare the results from the mathematical approach with the evolutionary algorithm approach. The results are same, but this can also be extended with a bigger size project in which the traditional mathematical approaches takes lots of time, and there are possibility for me to miss a particular candidate solution in my traditional approach. So we got the same results as I got in the mathematical.
So have you tried it out on? Yes, but when you get the same result, it doesn't prove that your genetic algorithm is superior. It just proves that your genetic algorithm can work. So what you may need to do is work on a larger problem.
Okay, sir.
To demonstrate the effectiveness of genetic algorithm over mathematical approaches. So your problem, the problem that you're looking to solve must be so large that it cannot be done mathematically, and it has to use your genetic algorithm approach. That's how you prove that genetic algorithm is better than mathematical approach.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Sure, I will try to implement it, sir.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Try to look for a problem that is so large that you need your genetic algorithm to solve it, and that a normal mathematical approach is not sufficient to solve that problem.
Okay, sir. Sure, I will try to do that.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
That's a good suggestion, Gopi. Yeah. And Gopi, here is one question for you from Ajit. What is the main advantage of genetic algorithm? Why not genetic programming, a next-gen tool, is used?
No, the advantage in using genetic algorithm is whenever you have some randomness in the sample problem, and if you want to select an optimal choice, this genetic algorithm makes it easier for us. And the algorithm why it is better to have is you can make your own modifications in your fitness function, and the nature in which you select a particular sample in a particular method. You have lots of feasibility in making changes in genetic algorithm comparatively with the available tools that you have in the programming platforms. It's difficult to go to crack down the codes and then change something in it according to your requirement. So it's advisable is to go with the genetic algorithm code to make some changes. That is simple to do. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Fine. I think we'll close this session and go move on to the next speaker. Sir Sendilvelan.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah,
Now
please
I'm
introduce
happy
the next
to,
speaker.
yes, ma'am. Yeah, now I'm happy to introduce fourth speaker of the day, Mr. George, sir. He's graduated Bachelor of Science at University of Melbourne. He completed Masters in Project Management at Victoria University and PhD candidate in University of Melbourne. He has 8 years of teaching experience in construction management and project management at Victoria University, 13 years of microbiologist and 17 years of CEO. Now I request you to continue with your presentation, sir.
Thank you. Excuse me, I'll share my screen with you guys and hopefully I won't stuff it up.
So did you make him the co-host?
Can everyone
Yes, sir.
Can you see it?
Yes, George,
Yeah.
we can see that. Very good.
Okay, thank you.
That's not your first slide, George.
No, it's not. No, it's misbehaving itself, but that's fine. Look, my name is George Hadge, and sadly, amongst all these engineers, I'm a person that does qualitative research rather than quantitative research. But having been a microbiologist, I'm quite used to quantitative people. Let's see. No, there's quite a few slides that are missing. Let me. Oh dear. This is what happens when you're 100 years old, guys. How's that? Is that better? Excellent. So this is some work that I did at Victoria University about 3 years ago. And it was to sort of see what was happening in the construction industry with imports. So let's have a look at the importance of the Australian construction industry to the economy. And look, from my research, practically almost everywhere that you go, the construction industry actually represents a very large portion of a country's workforce and GDP. And the construction industry is one of the cornerstones of the Australian economy. In the financial year ending 2018, construction turnover was $205 billion. It contributed about 8% to the Australian GDP. It employs about 1.12 million people, which, as TK said to you guys earlier, doesn't seem to be a lot of people, but you've got to remember we've only got a population of 25 million. So it's quite a large number. There are about 370,000 businesses involved in construction. And so it is quite a large industry. If we were to sort of look at the characteristics of the Australian construction industry, and again, I don't think this would vary very much from your industry. The life cycle stage of the industry is mature. Revenue is volatile and very much dependent. Some years it's up, some years it's down. The capital intensity is low because you don't really need a lot of money to start a construction company. And the concentration level is very low. The regulation level is medium. If you probably talk to Australian businessmen, they'd say it's over the top, but in reality, it is medium. The technology used is again medium, and the barriers of entry are medium. The globalization of our industry is low, although it has increased substantially in recent years. And the competitiveness of the industry is very, very high. and growth is around about 2.5%, which is pretty much the same as what the country's GDP increase is. So, construction industry is always a project-based industry. Construction is complex, and the reason that it is complex is that it's due to the fact that you need technology, you need to be able to work with humans, and there are lots of economic issues. And so when you have those three together, it goes to a complex type thing. It's project-based, which means that each project is unique, it's temporary, it's done by a team that comes together and then falls apart once the project is over. And construction really, in terms of, say, manufacturing, is the same as making a prototype. There are no two projects that are the same. So again, it's very hard to get the efficiencies that you would get out of manufacturing, for example, the Henry Ford assembly line. Okay, the study background, and we talk about manufacturing and historically how the industry has evolved. In the 1960s, Australian manufacturing produced everything that the country needs. Now, you guys have a very similar background to us because we were a British colony, as were you guys, and so you could understand that we produced everything that we needed. The stuff we couldn't produce, we bought from Mother England, all the way from the other side of the world. Local manufacturers were able to compete with overseas suppliers due to the imposition by the Australian government of huge import tariffs and the fixed currency. Geographic distance from the international manufacturing hubs of the time, the United Kingdom, Europe, and North America were very far away from us. Okay, now, one of the lenses that in our department that we look through when we're talking about overseas procurement is Baldwin. I would really recommend to everyone that wants to look at the way that construction is done in Australia to look at it through Baldwin's lens, where Baldwin initially said that there are three unbundlings that occurred historically. The first unbundling is with the English Industrial Revolution. The second unbundling that occurred, and this is the era that we're in, was the development of cheap real-time communications such as the internet. And what we're doing at the moment is a real example of that. You guys have got early morning in India or coming close to midday. Here in Australia, it's about to get dark. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But we can communicate in real time, and it really doesn't cost much. Cheap and fast transportation costs, and the transfer of first world technology and knowledge to industrializing economies. And India would be considered one of Baldwin's 6 major developing powers. And this gives rise to reduced production costs, networks and supply chains that are world best practice. I mean, if you want to have world best practice in terms of computing, India is your man. America no longer is, India is. Innovative technologies and economies of scale, large numbers of spot markets for suppliers to go to, and the rise of the super manufacturing hubs of the Asia Pacific Rim and India. Now, back in the 1990s, we had two prime ministers, Prime Minister Hawke and Prime Minister Keating, who were Labor politicians, and they decided that the best way forward for Australia was to slash their import tariffs and float the Australian dollar. This allowed Australian importers to source globally. Now, Baldwin nominates 6 countries who are superpowers, and 5 of them are in our neighbourhood: China, India, Indonesia, Korea, and Thailand. The 6th one that he nominates is Poland, and that's a long way away from us. These suppliers and manufacturers have been encouraged and supported by their governments to export their products and materials to the rest of the world. So my question was, what factors are driving global outsourcing of materials for the Australian construction industry and their associated risks? Just a bit of literature review, because there wasn't much when I first looked at this. This is before I met TK. And you can see that there are both push and pull factors associated with offshoring. And the same thing would apply to places like India. Push factors are such as things like local shortages, inefficient local suppliers, etc. Pull factors would be things like a superior technology or a product reputation. And you would include things like wanting to buy a Ferrari. Nowhere in Australia nor in India can you can drive or buy something that's the equivalent of a Ferrari. So we would say it's a pull factor to go to Italy and buy one so you can impress your friends and the people around you. Now, in terms of construction, Price Waterhouse conducted a study about 10 years ago that showed that about 10% of all construction inputs can be sourced offshore. The savings for a country like Australia would be 30 to 38% compared to domestic outsourcing. Now, when you consider that our industry makes a profit of around about 2.5%, savings of 30 to 38% are very good push forces, despite the negative risks associated with offshoring. Okay, let's have a look at some of these risks. Risk comes in both positive and negative risks. Positive risks for offshoring is that you can source low-cost products and high-quality products at that. Negative risks would be different legal systems. Now, your legal system actually is very much the same as the Australian legal system. And so Australians dealing in India feel quite comfortable because the systems are similar. But if you're dealing with China, there are linguistic and cultural differences. I sort of say that, you know, cultural differences are less with India. In Australia, everyone knows who Samuel Gavaskar is. Supplier issues and bounded rationality and uncertainty. Here we're talking about the Williams rationality and uncertainty. Okay, construction industry resources and research and offshoring. Offshoring has had very limited research done in Australia. It's a very new type of research. There's a paper produced by Dr. Wang from Melbourne University of 35 manufacturers that source materials and component products. And he came up with the conclusion that cost reduction was the main reason that it was done. Negative risks were found to be foreign governments, hidden costs, intellectual capital stealing, and quality problems. And you probably noticed that President Trump in America is constantly bitching about intellectual capital being stolen. There also has been a study by Crosley and Thompson, who are hired by people who manufacture in Australia, and he found that a lot of the products being imported, if not the bulk of them, are cheap and nasty. With the bulk of imports not complying with Australian standards. We also have a very militant construction industry union that says that there is a lot of quality problems and compliance. And these were things that I thought would actually be worth looking at, because one thing that a researcher has to watch out for is that people that fund you are the research is quite often biased. And so I thought this would be a good topic to actually research. Okay, the methodology I used, as I said to you guys, I'm a qualitative person, so it was qualitative, exploratory. There is an ultimate reality is qualitative research would sort of say to you, everyone is entitled to their reality. Again, this is not strange to Indian philosophies. However, the type of research that I did is akin to sort of saying, look, there's been a car accident. Here are the witnesses. They will all have a different perspective of what actually happened. So we know that there's a truth, which is the reality, but we know that there are different perspectives depending on who you talk to. So I went out and I spoke to 7 case studies. These were mainly CEOs of companies or senior people. One of them was importing timber. One was importing stone. The stone actually came from India. And I would say to any entrepreneurial person listening to me, contact your Australian Indian friends here in Australia and see what trade you can do with Australia using your resources in India. The stone guy was amazing. Structural steel, not non-structural steel, tiles, kitchens from Italy, and computer cabling from China. So what I did is use the technique called semi-structured interviews that took about 35 minutes on average at the head office of the company I'm interviewing, looking at the common experiences rather than statistical research that most quantitative people do. Analysing individual cases and then cross-case analysis between the different cases. And this is a roadmap of you have your research questions, you select cases. In case study research, you don't have large numbers of cases because what you're doing is you're looking for a story, you're not looking for a general conclusion. You design your data collection, you go out, you talk to your case studies, in my case 7, you write up 7 individual reports, and then you look across the cases to see if there are any common things that they find. You may create a theory out of something like that. You'd certainly develop policy implications. Now, if you're interested in case study research, the only reference that you really need to use, because everyone refers to him, is Ying. He put out a case study book, 2014. I think if you go on to Amazon, you could probably purchase it for about $20 or $30. Okay, so what did my study findings show? In terms of motivation, pretty much price issues were very important. The lack of local suppliers and their diversity, because being a small country, the local suppliers are not, there aren't many of them on the ground. Unmet demand and local supply behaviour and practice, excuse me, positive risks. Overseas, it's cheaper. Quite often, the higher quality of offshore products and products not locally available. The supply risks, in other words, the import risks, was finding the right supplier. All of them found that you had to try, by trial and error, find a supplier that was very good. And dealing with language and cultural problems was also difficult. Difference in product standards and expectations. Some products were below Australian standards, others weren't. And the ease of redress in faulty products. Most of the people I spoke to, if not all of them, said, forget the legal systems with overseas countries. You're not going to get anywhere. So you take it on the chin and you walk. And in terms of logistical risks, some of them had minor issues, but mainly once it got on a ship, it was fine. The legal and financial risks, excuse me, guys. Okay. Currency swings were a big issue, but look, you either assume that you see how far the currencies swing, and usually business is done in US dollars. And so what you do is you might sort of average it out or find mechanisms with your bank where the currency swings are averaged. The other thing that they found is the futility of legal redress with wrong stock sent and the corrupt nature of legal systems in some sourcing countries. Now, in terms of further studies, and I am doing further studies, I am at the moment studying case studies through construction companies in Australia rather than suppliers. And the firms studied were small to medium-sized enterprises, and my present research is actually talking to companies that are far larger. So look, thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I can take them now.
Yes, Professor Josh, that was a wonderful presentation. You know, as you have said, the quality is something which is very... Sir, Sendil, can you enable the chat?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry?
Leave the session for... Yeah. Professor George, as you have mentioned, you know, it's very essential to have the quality than the quantity, and but then ensuring a high quality in construction, because it's all random process. If you see the actual site, which is on site, what is happening, quality, ensuring quality on site is a Herculean task, I should say. For example, if you take the simple water cement ratio, the designer gives some water cement ratio, but what happens on site is something else. So quality engineer plays a major role. And how do we, what are the suggestions you would have to take up this quality assurance in construction?
Look, Professor, the way that from my present research, the way that Australian companies are handling it, and at the moment, mainly it's in China, and we would say that we really, Australia would be it would be good for Australia if there was an alternative to China, but the way that they handle it at the moment is that the good ones have employees of the company in China, and the Chinese very kindly let the Australian buying company have people go into their factories and actually watch the thing being made. So they are on top of what quality there is. Now, you would know from your own country that there are producers that make rubbish, and there are producers that make wonderful things. And if you take your offshoring seriously, you would make it your business to know who makes rubbish and who doesn't. And the only way that you can do that is to actually be in the country and have employed in your company people from that country that can actually go into the factory and they can actually see what is being made. So if you reassure yourself that you've got a good manufacturer, you have an Indian employee who works for you, you're paying them, that knows the culture, knows the language, they can actually go into the factory and they can look around and they can actually watch the stuff being made. They can actually watch the stuff being put into containers. Then you're not going to have any problems.
Mahfouz Alam, I think, has a question. He has raised his hand. Sir, can you unmute him?
Sorry?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Do any of the students have any questions?
Yeah, right. Yeah, the other participant is online. He is just getting unmuted. So, Rameshwar,
Yes, ma'am.
you have unmuted him?
Sorry, do I have to unmute someone?
Yeah. Okay, fine. I think we'll move on to the chat box. Somebody raised the hand. So I thought, yeah, I have a question here.
There are 500 people here on my screen.
Right. I'm just reading out the question for you.
Yes.
What about the labor cost? Does it keep changing because of all these changes? Isn't it a loss for them?
Are we talking about Australia or are we talking about overseas?
It is about the Australian, I suppose.
Look, labour costs in all Western countries are high. We are a democratic country exactly like you. All I can say is that if someone is on $50 an hour and you say to them next week you're going to be on $40 an hour, the government will fall. So labour costs in Australia are not going to go down. Every country should play to its strengths. Our strengths is we have a liberal democracy, we have a highly educated population. We should not be doing things that require our labour force to reduce its wages. We should be doing things that require high technology, high education, and being able to charge people for our higher education and higher technology. The idea that in a country like Australia that's mainly made up of Irishmen, that you're going to reduce their wages. There are only two things in Australia, or maybe three things, that would cause revolution. And reduction in wages would be one of them. the guys that produce beer going on strike would also cause a revolution, but that's about it.
Okay, fine.
But by the way, this is from a person that considers it wonderful that an Indian engineer can now afford to buy their parents a house, whereas engineers in Australia cannot afford to buy their parents a house.
So one other question, Pranesh is asking, how procurement management can be facilitated when coming to offshore supplies?
Let me try. Can I? Are you asking how is it done here in Australia?
Yeah, in general, how procurement management can be facilitated when coming to offshore supplies?
Look, I mean, this is just simple world trade that's been going on for as long as man has been on Earth. You need a product that you can sell in your own country, and you need to know people in the offshore country that can facilitate the purchase of that. And it is no different here than... sorry, guys. My children always ring at the wrong time. You just have to sort of ignore them. But look, it is just free trade. I honestly do not know how to answer this question. What you have to do is that, like all procurement, you really have to make sure that what you buy is at a price that you can afford to bring out to us to the home base, and to be able to readily sell it here. And as I said to you, the way that we're actually reducing the risk is to actually have people that are your own employees in the offshore country, making sure that the deal actually takes place in the way that you want it.
Yes. Thank you very much, George.
Could I add to the students that are there that some of you might not be quite into engineering, but might be businessmen, that you would say to yourself, we have a very large Indian population here in Australia. As you could probably tell, when Australia plays India in cricket, half the ground is filled with Indians. They're all highly educated, all very good businessmen. You have a product in India, for example. I think Italy is about the only other country that produces stone of the quality that India produces. All you need is to be able to supply something at the right cost. And you're able to make a profit. The guy in Australia is able to make a profit. And really all you need to do is send him a box of samples, and he goes around to the builders here and says, I can get this from India at a quality that you want. He sends you a fax. Stone, in terms of construction, is always one of the last items to be used. So, but it's all ordered at the start of a construct. So you've got about 6 months from the time the order goes in to the time that you supply it. You make a good profit. Your trader here in Australia makes a good profit, and everyone is happy. That's what business is about.
Yeah. So I think, thank you very much, Dr. Josh. You have been very patient and you have spent a lot of your time and energy on this session. We are really very happy for the way you have contributed. It was very informative, very useful and thought-provoking too.
Thank you,
I would
Professor.
now...
I was going to say it's getting dark. Let me put the light on. It's midday there, but it's night time here.
Okay. Now...
hopefully that's better.
Right, that's fine, that's fine. You look bright now. Yeah. Yeah. So now I would leave the forum open for questions for all the four speakers for a discussion. And maybe if anybody would like to raise your hand, you are welcome to raise the hand. Any of the participants, if you would like to ask any question in person, you can raise your hand. Or I have one question here coming from Anita, who was asking, when you study the material losses due to wastage, it is a major factor. If we reduce wastage, there is a better chance to reduce the cost without affecting the performance. What is your view on this?
DK, would you like to take that one?
Yes, it's a very simple question. The answer is yes.
Yes.
Yes. If you reduce
Yes,
wastage, you actually save on costs. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. There's something called as lean construction. They
Yes.
try to minimize the wastage in all forms.
Hmm.
So that is one other interesting area to work upon. One of my other research scholars is working on this lean construction. Yeah, that's fine. And yeah, there's another question. For the companies to survive, they need to reduce construction cost. But if they import, it is detrimental to the economy. Where do we strike a balance?
Look,
George.
sorry, DK. All
Go,
I was
George,
going
go.
to say is that I have to be honest, I have no problems with workers here in Australia losing their jobs, because over time, over and over again, manufacturers in Australia have said, oh, where people will lose their jobs if we import things. The employment rate in Australia has never been lower today. If you were to go back 15 years or 20 years ago, unemployment was around about 7 or 8%. These days, even with COVID, we're not at the, we're nearly at, well, COVID has been strange, but Australia's normal unemployment is around about 4 or 5%. Economies adjust. People get educated. Instead of digging with a shovel, they get a university education and get a better job. Don't break their backs anymore.
Yeah. There's another question, like, if we import labor from poor or developing countries, how far it is justifiable, but the construction cost may go down of lesser wages.
Do you want me to answer that, Prof?
Yes, DK. Tell them
look,
about CFMEU.
Look, okay, there are a few ways to answer this question. In Australia, it is not possible for us to import labor because the labor union here is very, very powerful. So if you try to bring in workers from overseas, the local workers will go on strike, and no construction work, no manufacturing work, no transportation, nothing will move. So it is just not possible to bring in foreign workers into Australia to do these type of work, especially if it requires a little bit of skill. The only sector that can bring in foreign workers is probably in agriculture, where they bring in workers from Pacific nations to pick fruit. Other than that, no workers can come in. Now, we like to keep our wages high because I believe all of you are either students or working. Now, can you imagine if you already have a wage, and George has already mentioned this, how can you, if you make $50 a day, how are you going to react if somebody comes in and then because of that person reduces your wage from $50 a day to $20 a day? What are you going to do? You're just going to be protesting. You'll be on the streets protesting against the government allowing other workers to come in. So in a Western democracy, that will never occur. All right? We will never allow cheap foreign workers to come into Australia. Now, there is another way of looking at this. We could perhaps, instead of bringing the workers here, allow some manufacturing work to go to Asia. And that's exactly what's happening. This is what we are describing today. Manufacturing work has gone to Asia because the workers are cheaper in Asia. We can't bring the workers here, but we can bring the work to Asia. And that's how it's working, how global trade is operating today. I hope that gives you some some ideas to think about how to position India in this globalized world.
Yes, true. You have a lot of compliments for the entire team. In the junction box, we see so much compliments are coming, saying that it's informative, it's interesting, it's very nice and all. And there's someone who's asking, what is the scope for an international civil engineering student in Australia?
Is Natira, right? That's asking the question.
Yeah,
now. I'm trying to understand what angle. Are you talking about a civil engineering student who is already in Australia? Now, if a student is already in Australia, they can apply for a visa to allow them to work. If you are not in Australia, it would be very, very difficult to apply for a job from outside Australia. You would need work rights to be able to work here. Then an alternative would be to come here to study for 2 or 3 years, either for an advanced degree or a postgraduate degree. So that could be the other option if you are looking to work in Australia.
That's it. So fine, Professor.
The other issue is scholarships are very hard to come by these days, especially with the COVID-19. All our budgets are cut, and it is now very, very, very competitive to win a scholarship. So you would have to be possibly the number 1 or number 2 student at an Indian Institute of Technology or an Indian Institute of Science or an Indian Institute of Management to win a scholarship to Australia today. I see that there are other questions about PhD positions here. Yes, we have lots of PhD positions, but again, the scholarships are very difficult to find.
And
now,
before
if you
that,
can find funding from your home country, that would be much better. Padmanabhan, basis of mechanization. Was to create employment. Yes, now that is a very good question. Okay, mechanization versus employment creation. I'm not sure if you attended my talk, I think 2 weeks ago, where I spoke about the cost of different materials and the cost of labor. In a developing country, very often it is cheaper if you use labor relative to mechanization. But if you start thinking from an industry development perspective, you would definitely want to improve your technology. And to improve technology, you would want to adopt mechanization. You would want to use better technologies. But unfortunately, when you adopt all these more advanced technologies, your construction costs will go up. So many developing countries are stuck because enough money to spend on construction. And you need to invest in construction to improve construction quality. So what do you do first? Do you improve quality, or do you spend more on construction? So it's a chicken and egg problem. Almost every developing country in the world struggles with this, and there is no answer. You have to either provide the chicken or provide the egg. Okay?
Yes. So that brings us to more or less the end of the session. It was very, very informative, and it's a good chat. And you pass on the question. Which tool is one other question we have from George? Which tool is printing and researcher using in risk management? Can you pass on to the presenter? Which tool is trending? Yeah. Which tool is trending?
What
and
does
researcher
it mean by trending?
I'm using in risk management. That is, I think he means which is the one which is in use, wide use now.
Let me just try to address that question. I think all three of us are more into the economics of the construction sector, so we would not be able to answer questions on risk management. I'm not an expert on risk management, so I don't want to say anything just in case I give you the wrong information.
Me too.
Yeah, Six Sigma. Yes, I am aware of Six Sigma. Again, we are not experts in Six Sigma, so I'm not going to say anything about Six Sigma.
Fine, that's fine. That should not be a problem. So fine, Professor George, Professor TK Chan, and the other two scholars who are there with us today. It's a very wonderful session we had for running for about 2.5 hours without, knowing the time at all. It's very informative, very interesting, and it's really thought-provoking. It is really putting some points into a point where we should think how to take it forward and how to close on the loop. And definitely we'll have a further session on this. We'll have a closed room discussion where I invite some few of our experts to introduce, and then we'll see how best we can identify a few areas to work together and see which way it is going to be beneficial for both the organizations and the nations, in fact. So Padmanabhan, I may suggest that he's saying that for a few big projects, Mr. Padmanabhan has one suggestion to give. So I'll just read his suggestion. For big infrastructure projects like highways and bridges, it is good to use technology-based mechanization, and for rural construction, manpower base is good as far as Indian government is concerned. So thank you, Mr. Padmanabhan. So professors and the researchers, thank you very much. So we'll get in touch with you once again, and we'll take this session further forward to part 2. Sir Sendilvelan, Rameshwaran, you can go in for a formal vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Prof. Madhavi, let me just say thank you very much for organizing this. All three of us are very happy to have contributed to this symposium. I think we hope that you've learned something a little bit about what we do here at the University of Melbourne. Even though we are in the construction program, the work we do is not really in managing construction projects, but what we do is to understand how the construction industry operates. All right, so it's a combination of technology, economics, and management. It's something that we would like to share with other research universities around the world, because we understand that not many academics are interested in this area. So we believe that it could create a small community of practice where more of us meet up and talk about these issues. It does not only affect Australia, it affects Australia, its trading partners, and I think it will increasingly impact how India finds its place in the world.
So it's nice of you. What you're telling is true. And Mr. George, if you would like to take in the project management this thing, you may please contact us. Sir Rameshwaran, you please post your contact number. So those who would want to have any clarifications regarding further work in construction management or in any of our higher studies or undergraduate courses, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Mind you, I can't say the same about the Indian cricket team. They always depress me. We've got a lousy cricket team at the moment.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot for spending your time with us. It's wonderful having the interaction. Thanks a lot. Yes,
Bye-bye.
definitely. So,
Okay, ma'am.
yeah, bye. Yeah.
Now it is
Please,
time for
please
me. Now it is time for me to share the vote of thanks. It's been a wonderful day, and thanking everyone responsible for the successful of this workshop is my duty. I would thanks ultimately for successful completion of the workshop, followed by our HOD ma'am, who is a mastermind behind this workshop. We thank you, ma'am, for all guidance from day one. Then I would thank for all 4 speakers who made a session meaningful with their valuable talk. Then I would do thanks to our Central Valen for being a part of this workshop. Lastly, I am obliged to thanks all participants who made the workshop a great success with their active participation. Thanks one and all.
Thank you. Yeah, so we'll keep in touch. I'll get in touch with you, Professor, and we'll find a plan for the next session too, next part of this continuation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye. Good night. Bye.